And now back to today's actual schedule. Now that I got the Ed Wood video uploaded, I'll try to kind of get back on track again. And we're doing that by doing another genre. This one is actually, I thought of it first as a world genre, and by first I mean some time ago. Uh, but it has since then occurred to me that it is more of a meta genre again. The best phrase the best phrase for it I can find, best name for it, is supernatural. And I say the best name I can find for it because I'm not sure it entirely covers what it is. Some people lump it in with urban fantasy, but that's not really the case. Urban fantasy is more of a world genre that defines how world works, whereas supernatural can be anything anywhere, and that's kind of the gist of the genre. It's a mystery that typically cannot be solved, but is solved for you, or sometimes not even that. The idea is that regardless of what kind of world or style or plot you're quote unquote living in, a key factor in what's happening is the supernatural, hence the name. The name is not, as far as I know, taken from the series Supernatural, although that is a prime candidate for it. In fact, the name I might subconsciously have taken it from that. I'll try to not dive too deeply into that philosophical tangent. But yeah, it can be used as a kind of guideline to the main concept. And the main concept is that something is happening and something supernatural is behind it, or something seemingly supernatural. There is a subgenre which goes all the way back to Scooby Doo, um, and could perhaps be called Scooby Doo Supernatural. I don't know. Um, but I usually call it fake supernatural, in which it seems that there's something supernatural behind events, but in reality, it's just old smoke and mirrors, or misunderstandings, or old folks' tales, or stuff like that. In reality, it's just some crazy con man, or some really spooky old lady, or some serial killer that has been hyped to supernatural levels, stuff like that. But the point of supernatural is that there is a mystery that isn't really a mystery. Because unless it's a supernatural mystery story, the mystery is simply that something weird is going on, and somewhere along the lines, you may be informed about how it came about that some supernatural force is intervening. Maybe it's an angry ghost trying to assert revenge, or maybe it's spiritual energies escaping some place or artifact or something like that. But everything around it is actually every other genre involved. If you've got let's see, well, the typical one could be the one from the actual TV series Supernatural, where you got a modern action comedy that is, well, I guess action comedy is both the plot and the style in this case. And it just happens to be supernatural. Someone is killing people in strange ways in dark highways, and the two main characters go to investigate, and it turns out it's a ghost or something. But in essence, they're just chasing a killer. Just so happens that the killer is supernatural. And that is very often the trap of the supernatural genre, because if it's really just that. Why even make it supernatural? Why paint it in supernatural colors when you don't need to? If you want a murder mystery, have a murder mystery. Why does it have to be ghosts? If you want an action thriller, have an action thriller. Why does it have to be demons or werewolves? Stuff like that. It could just be a wild animal or a crazy slasher. And a lot of supernatural stories actually play with that, making it seem like a fake supernatural story until the very end. But if you want it to be truly supernatural, then the supernatural elements have to have a point to them. There has to be something that the supernatural entities can do that wouldn't be possible if it wasn't supernatural. Typical thing could be walk through walls. How did someone kill this guy who had locked himself up in a room full of food and a single toilet and a bed, and then just waited for months, and then suddenly he just dies of a slit throat? Nothing in there that could do it, nobody that could do it, and from the evidence, he couldn't do it himself. It wouldn't be physically possible. Well, because it's supernatural, something walked through the walls. And that is why I'm taking up supernatural as a genre right after hardcore science fiction stuff. Because one of the ways that fake supernatural can play out is that it is actually a secret sci fi story. Those two genres, supernatural and secret sci fi, are basically one and the same in that you take an otherwise normal story, normal world genre, normal plot genre, normal style genre, and then you slap this weird strangeness on top of it. And secret sci-fi usually deals with sci-fi that is very advanced or very unusual, so it might as well be supernatural. And what goes for one genre usually goes for the other, with the possible exception that some secret sci-fi will try to rationalize the secret sci-fi element to a great extent, but most of them, in my opinion, do not succeed at that. They fail at making it seem like it's not sci fi. That strange device that lets someone go through walls or break into a locked bunker to slit someone's throat. Yeah, you can make a lot of explanations about how it works, who invented it, and why it's not commonplace and stuff like that. But it just doesn't make it rational. It's still sci-fi, and that means that it might as well, in many cases, be supernatural, unless you have some way of dividing it up. And that usually means integrating with the other genres, mainly the world genre, which is to me very interesting, perhaps the most interesting part of good supernatural. um, I haven't seen that much good secret sci-fi, but I've seen some decent secret sci-fi that tries to do the same. The world genre is usually another standard genre, very often modern, as in currently the present, the world that we actually know, just with the supernatural slapped onto it. But the existence of supernatural things might actually affect the world in general, usually by having factions or at least people spring up that are more or less used to dealing with it. or have an interest in it somehow. The typical one that might have been popularized, not invented, but popularized by the TV series Supernatural, is the idea of hunters. Now, we do have these reality shows with ghost hunters that to me are a joke, and a bad one at that. Um, but the idea with hunters is, in fact, that there are people who specialize in understanding these supernatural threats or just these supernatural things. There may be allies, there may be neutrals, there may be many things, and how to deal with them. And even though the world is still our world, these people walk among us. And there may also be those who use the supernatural to their advantage, but it's still within our world. We're not slipping into full on urban fantasy. We don't have wizards dueling it out in street fights. We don't have unicorns terrorizing rural London. Is rural London even a thing? Rural England. Um, the supernatural elements are a very small, very hidden part of our world. But there are people who deal with these things in one way or another, and they may be influential in our world. Um, Although Harry Potter is definitely urban fantasy, there are elements of this in the Harry Potter stories, in that there are people who know about magic who represent the magical society to the mundane world, the muggles, as they're called in those stories. And this concept could easily exist in many other ways. There could be supernatural departments of large corporations, or people with even slight supernatural abilities may use those abilities to get ahead in corporate life, or gain power in other ways, or gain other personal advantages. In this case, my thoughts drift to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the series, not the movie, although nothing bad about the movie, but the series really dives into the idea that things beyond our understanding do exist, but they do not change the world entirely. There are organizations that try to deal with this. Some try to deal with it from a supernatural standpoint, some try to deal with it from a sci fi standpoint or even fake sci fi standpoint. But they exist, and there are people who try to use these, both the supernatural and the fake sci-fi stuff, to their advantage. I keep thinking back on an episode of Buffy that has a guy trying to impress a girl, and basically impress everybody by using some kind of Jekyll and Hyde chemical mixture. But yeah, they have werewolves, they have definitely vampires, that's a central part of the show. But they have all kinds of monsters, all kinds of magic, but it's still not a magical world. It's still not a supernatural world. It's just our world, but with supernatural things in it. And sometimes the line becomes blurry, but the main point is that if the supernatural, if the importance of the supernatural elements in the world, not to the story, but in the world, if the importance of the supernatural in the fictional world outweighs the importance of the mundane, then you're slipping into urban fantasy. If it's a supernatural story, then the police are still a force to be reckoned with. You need to take corporations and you need to take government institutions serious, and they play an important role even when things are supernatural. But if it's the supernatural that's basically outmatching these powerful institutions at any point. Then you've got a urban fantasy, because then the mundane world just becomes a thin veneer to cover the real important world that is the supernatural. So it's a matter of whether the supernatural or the mundane are truly in power. And that can be a sliding scale. In typical supernatural fiction, the real world is in power, and supernatural events are usually on the fringe of society, happening in places that are more or less empty of people, or at least so far away from the city hubs that they might as well be. Again, rural England or rural America or rural anywhere, really. And the supernatural elements are minor, they are not a threat to the status quo. Supernatural events will not be a big deal in elections, it will not sway corporations. There usually isn't that much money in being a hunter or whatever it is. If you want anything, any advantage out of the supernatural, you usually have to abuse it greatly. And at the other end of the scale, then there's urban fantasy, which I will go into soon enough. But you have a kind of slide where it becomes gray when the supernatural starts to be influential, and it becomes a push and shove between the supernatural and mundane world. The supernatural isn't taking over, but the mundane world is forced to react to it. And one thing I should probably mention, since I keep mentioning urban fantasy so much, is that the supernatural genre, just like the secret sci fi genre, is typically secret supernatural. It's secretly supernatural. It's a secret supernatural genre. It's just not something you mention because it kind of goes without saying. The supernatural, and this also exposes a bit how the difference is between much of urban fantasy and supernatural. The supernatural elements of the world are so freaky and often so unpredictable, and definitely so minor in the grander scheme of things, that they cannot really expose themselves. The world does not become a supernatural world from a story being a supernatural genre. It's too small. Either it would get stomped out, or nobody would believe it, or things would just hide away in an instant, or maybe even already be so hidden that the mundane world just cannot really adopt it. It cannot become a part of the mundane world. The supernatural is a hidden part of our world, even if there is some kind of society around it. The world, or whatever world it is, our world, another world, that depends on the world genre. But the supernatural lives in the shadows. If it does more than that, you're typically talking about urban fantasy, which also means that stories are typically not of the world shattering kind. They're usually more on a personal level. Um, Either small stories about the victims of something supernatural, or stories about the people chasing the supernatural and how they are personally involved. Again, the series Supernatural does this very well, at least at the beginning, in that some supernatural entity had some supernatural plan, and that ended up killing the mother of the two characters and sending the father on a hunt for whatever did it. So it's not about world shattering events, although the events do escalate. but originally it's a personal vendetta. And sometimes that fits better into the supernatural genre because once it becomes too big, it's almost impossible to avoid becoming urban fantasy. And the same goes for secret sci fi. Once the secret sci fi becomes too big, it's just too unlikely that it wouldn't become a part of the mundane world. Someone would adopt the technology or try to fight it or try to co opt it. The secret would become the not secret, and the world would change. The world usually doesn't change in supernatural in the genre. The world remains the same, but some things in it just keep slithering around in the dark.